Good morning. Thursday morning, February 4th. Welcome everyone. A little bit colder this morning. Yesterday was just wet after the rain and cool, but this morning it's frosty. Down in the 30s somewhere. Jan Akins, good morning to you, and Kim Johnson, Mike and Kim, Sally Crocker, Letitia Sexton, good morning everybody. Welcome this morning. See, Jeremy and Wendy are arriving. Good morning. Welcome everybody. Mike and Joe Stromberg, good to see you this morning. Jim and Kathy Fuente, welcome. Deanne Fine, good morning to you. Daryl and Suzanne, you guys are so faithful, watching all the way from Arizona. Good morning. Carmen Lego, good morning to you. Lori Agassi, good morning. Debbie King, welcome this morning. Karen Lowe, Marcy Walters, Tim and Marcy, welcome to you. Valerie Cavalli, good morning to you and Michael this morning. Margaret Arkin, good morning. Stephen Andrea, welcome. We're in Psalm 124 today. There's my mom, good morning to you. Psalm 124. And this is a song of ascent, a song that Israel would sing as they made their pilgrimage to Jerusalem 3 times a year to celebrate the Passover or Pentecost or the Feast of Tabernacles. And they would sing these songs as they traveled together. And this is a Psalm of David, Psalm 124. And I'm just going to read part of it to you, and it should be fairly self-explanatory. The content says, "If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, let Israel now say, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, when people rose up against us, they would have swallowed us up alive, when their anger was kindled against us. When then the flood would have swept us away, and the torrent would have gone over us. Then over us would have gone all the raging waters. Bless the Lord, who has not given us as prey to their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth." And that's the entire psalm. It's a short one, and I love that one. I just reflected on it for a while, and when you think about it, if not for the Lord, where would Israel be? If not for the Lord. And they're singing this song on the way to worship God, who has delivered them in the past from all of their enemies. Though their enemies were outnumbering them, though their enemies were stronger, they had probably a more complex war machine. Yet Israel, as they traveled to Jerusalem, the capital city, the wall still stood, the temple was still there. Israel had never been destroyed. And so it is they're singing about the how God has protected them all of these years. And I was reflecting on that and thinking about Israel's beginning. If not for the Lord, where would Israel be? And obviously Israel came into being based upon a promise from God and a miracle. God called Abraham when he was living in Ur of the Chaldees, and he said, if you leave your family and your land here and travel south down to Canaan, where you don't have family and you don't have land, I will make you into a great nation. I will give you the land, and all nations will be blessed through you. Well, Abraham, as you remember, didn't have kids, and he wasn't young. And he and Sarah, though they, I'm sure, tried to have children, because that was how you retain land in your family, were in a really rough spot. They didn't have kids and they couldn't have kids. So God says, I guarantee you're going to have a kid if you trust me, and your descendants will be like the stars in the heaven and the sand on the seashore. You're going to be really blessed. And so Abraham leaves everything he knows and trusts God, travels down to Canaan, and God fulfills his promise to him. When Abraham is 99 years old and Sarah is 90, she gets pregnant and they have a son, Isaac. God fulfills his promise. If not for the Lord, Israel would not exist. Abraham and Sarah, left to natural means, could not have children. But because of their faith in God, God miraculously promised them children. And he fulfilled his promise. So fast forward about the aspect of God's promise to Abraham about land. You think about the generation of Israel that was in slavery in Egypt during the time of Moses. And God delivered them miraculously from that great nation. In fact, God would remind them later, I think in Deuteronomy, when he says, who has ever heard of a God rescuing a lesser people, a lesser nation, out of a greater nation? Who has ever heard of that happening? A people who were slaves. They weren't trained in war. They weren't trained to overthrow their oppressor. God himself reached down and delivered them and plucked them up out of that greater nation and rescued them, delivered them out of their hands. Who's ever heard of that? God himself, if not for the Lord, Israel would not exist as a nation. That was their birth as a nation. God gave them his law. God fed them in the wilderness. God allowed them to enter into the promised land and drove out all their enemies before them, though their enemies were greater than them. If not for the Lord, where would Israel be? And fast forward, even today, we still talk about Israel and God's plan and promise for Israel, that it will be fulfilled based upon all his fulfilling to this point. And you think about it, we no longer talk on the news about the Perizzites and the Amalekites and the Canaanites and the Edomites because they're all wiped out. They don't exist anymore. Maybe their genetics are still in other nations and so on, but they don't exist as nations any longer. Though they were greater than Israel, yet this little nation continues to this day. And it's because of God. If not for the Lord, Israel says, our enemies would have overtaken us. So blessed be those who put their trust in the Lord, who made heaven and earth. That's how the psalm ends. And so I just invite you to reflect today. I mean, that's how God worked with his people to establish his truth and to make himself known in the world. And all of us are beneficiaries of this. Our salvation finds its roots in Abraham. Jesus came through the lineage of Abraham, obviously through Adam and Eve, but all the way, to the promise of Abraham. All nations will be blessed through you. Speaking of Jesus, we are the beneficiaries of God's faithfulness and his deliverance to Israel, who continues to exist to this day. And through our faith in Jesus, where would we be? If not for Jesus, if not for the Lord, what would our life look like? Where would we be? What hope would we have? How, as we recount how God has delivered us, how God has formed himself in us all of our life. And I just invite you to take some time today and reflect on that. Make a list. Write down from your very beginning, seeing God's hand at work in your life. And I did that briefly this morning. I ran out of time. I had to come here. But it was easy for me just to, and it was, you write down the obvious things, but as I began to think about it more, things started coming to surface that sometimes I take for granted that, like, yeah, if not for the Lord, where would I be? And it was a really fun exercise, fulfilling exercise to recognize the hand of God in my life from the time that I was a child all the way to this day. And so one byproduct of that was not only recognizing the Lord's hand in my life, but even as that psalm ends, blessed be those who take refuge in the Lord who made heaven and earth, my troubles, my worries, the things that I'm concerned about in this life seem to be diminished when I think about how God has directed my life to this point, and the fact that He's the one who made heaven and earth. He's infinitely powerful. So why would I be overly concerned and worried about some of these aspects of my life that tend to occupy my mind and heart? And so it was good. It was helpful to rest and rejoice and sing praise about the God. Not only where would I be except for the Lord, but also where gives me perspective on all the aspects of my life that are very important to me, that they are securely in God's hands. The people in my life and the circumstances of my life are securely in God's hands. And I can be free. I can release those things to Him because my refuge is in the Lord who made heaven and earth. And so I'll just bless you today with that thought. Hopefully you'll spend some time and reflect on that for your own life and see the blessing of God in your life. We'll see you this weekend. Just remember, for those of you who are going to be attending Grace this weekend, we are going to have our annual meeting at 9 a.m. This Sunday. Therefore, we're only going to have our 10:30 worship service. So I encourage you, if you are a member of Grace, come to our 9 o'clock meeting. We're going to recap 2020 and see where we're headed in 2021. And then we'll all worship together, celebrating the blessing of God in our 10:30 worship service. And we'll see you then. If not, we'll see you next Monday right here. God bless you.